Hey, who's behind these Occupy Toronto and Occupy Vancouver protests? Well, a lot of big Canadian labour unions are. I found that out when I went to visit Occupy Toronto, and they told me the unions were paying for the expensive things like the generators. But who's actually doing the organising? Well, something called Acorn is behind it, Greenpeace too. And joining us to figure out who these folks are is an expert in Acorn. Our friend Mathew Vadum joins us from Washington, D.C. Mathew's the author of a book called Subversion, Inc. Mathew, welcome back to the program.
Hey, great to be here, Ezra. Hope you're good today.
I am, thank you. You know, when I went down to visit Occupy Toronto about 10 days ago now, I saw lots of riff-raffy kids and some true homeless and some deinstitutionalized folks. But behind the scenes, I saw an old guy who seemed to be a bit of a puppet master, and he was wearing a shirt that said Acorn on it. Now, he didn't refer to the little chipmunky thing. He was referring to the U.S.-based organization that you've written a whole book about. Tell our viewers, who is Acorn, and why would they be orchestrating these Occupy protests?
Well, Acorn stands for Association of Community Organizations for Reform Now. It's a very controversial, radical leftist group here in the United States that President Obama himself was involved with before in his days as a community organizer in Chicago. It's very closely tied to this group. They've had a lot of problems in the United States. Last November 2010, they filed Chapter 7 bankruptcy in Brooklyn for the nation. Now, this was the shell corporation that ran everything, but they had their state chapters across the country incorporate themselves separately under new names. So they're still carrying on the aggressive Saul Alinsky, in-your-face organizing tactics that served them well for 40 years and allowed them to blackmail and intimidate banks and corporations into doing what they wanted them to do.
Now, you said Saul Alinsky. I know who that is because I've read a book by him called Rules for Radicals. Can you give a 30-second summary for our viewers on who is Saul Alinsky? Why is he the inspiration for these protesters?
Saul Alinsky was a communist sympathizer who died in the early 1970s. He very much believed that it was important to mobilize the masses, the poor people and
by the way, you can see the Acorn guy in the background. I'm going to interrupt you right now. In the video footage in the top right, there you see in the top right corner of the screen, you see the fellow wearing the Acorn shirt. Matthew, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just want to point out...
Is he chanting?
No.
Is he chanting, "We are Acorn, mighty, mighty Acorn"? That's what they love to do.
No, he was standing back and directing things. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Matthew. I just wanted to point him out because I wanted to prove to my viewers that it was Acorn on the streets of Toronto organizing. You were saying Saul Alinsky was a Marxist radical.
Right, brutal, in-your-face tactics. So he taught them that you have to go to the homes of the people you're opposing, the people, the evil corporation that you're attacking, and you got to intimidate their families. You got to make them feel uncomfortable physically. You got to cause trouble where they live, and that helps you get to them. So he used these brutal techniques that would sometimes devolve into violent situations.
Now, we've seen some of that violence in some of the Occupy protests in the United States. Now, I want to show a quote to you about another organizing faction up here in Canada. The Occupy Edmonton group is being stick-handled not by Acorn, but by Greenpeace International. And they actually put the minutes of one of their meetings online, and I'd like to read an excerpt for you. This is from Mike Hudema, the Greenpeace anti-oil sands extremist, and this is what he was telling his fellow occupiers. Here's what he said. He said, "I am not able to get arrested, but if people decide that we want to stay, I'm with you. If we decide we're going to leave, I'm with you." So Mike Hudema was talking because they're being kicked out, because they're actually on private property in Edmonton, and the property owner has demanded they get off. Mike Hudema wants them to stay and fight, but what was so funny is he said this, and it's on record now. He said, "I can't get arrested, but maybe you little people can. I'm an important Greenpeace organizer." Is Acorn doing the same thing in the States? Are they manipulating other people to get arrested, or do Acorn leaders get arrested themselves?
Acorn leaders sometimes get arrested, not usually though. They prefer to use poor people as cannon fodder for the revolution. So they'll put all sorts of people who don't understand laws or politics and they will basically indoctrinate them. They'll tell them to show up at a place at 6:30 in the morning with signs. They won't even tell them beforehand what they're protesting, and it's kind of like a military operation. That's the way that an Acorn insider described it to me once.
Now,
so they like to use poor people to achieve their political goals.
Now, where does Acorn get its money? I mean, that activist I pointed out wearing the orange shirt, he's a professional. This is all he does. I mean, he's often seen at political events shouting at people. Who pays his rent and his groceries?
Radical liberal foundations. George Soros, for a long time, through his charity, the Open Society Institute, was a big supporter of Acorn. And then the more low-profile liberal or left-leaning charitable foundations support them, such as the Ford Foundation, the W.K. Kellogg, as in Kellogg Cereal Foundation in Battle Creek, Michigan, the Annie E. Casey Foundation, another left-wing charity in Baltimore, Maryland, and all these liberal groups that have these huge charitable endowments love to fund radicalism, and there's so many of these groups that they support, and they have been supporting Acorn, and some of them have been supporting Occupy Wall Street. George Soros's group, Open Society Institute, gave money to the Adbusters Media Foundation.
Why, Matthew? Why would billion-dollar foundations in the States, who got their money from corporate tycoons, give money to radicals who want to destroy the capitalist system? Why would money from a billionaire be spent to attack the capitalist system?
Because people like George Soros is not just a currency speculator. He's not just a market manipulator and a hedge fund manager. He thinks of himself as some kind of a philosopher king, and he has been on record. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, he said the greatest threat to the open society, this is a term he likes to use a lot from Karl Popper, the greatest threat to the open society today is capitalism, not communism. He wants China to become the world's reigning superpower. He said that China has a more effective, better functioning government than the American government. This is a man who is very, very good at using capitalism to make money, but he doesn't believe in the tenets of it. He wants a much stronger government. And you really have to wonder about this guy when he says such nice things about the totalitarian communist system in the People's Republic of China.
Matthew, I've got to stop you there.
There are twisted people out there. He's like a James Bond villain, Ezra.
Matthew, I look forward.
Always want to destroy things.
I want to have you back on the show. There is so much to go over. Mathew Vadum, author of Subversion, Inc.
Thank you.
So grateful for your insights.